What is up, good people? Welcome back to the video version of the Tone Mob Podcast. That's right, I stress video version because this has been an audio show for around a decade, and you can get that on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts at. You can get it there. Or, since you're already here on YouTube or whatever video platform you're watching this on, you can continue on with this video with my new friend, Reverend Peyton, slide guitar extraordinaire. This dude is an absolute beast on guitar. He's a beast in real life, but he's also a super nice guy. You're really gonna like this episode. He's got a lot of great things to say, and he has the craziest Fletcher story. Fletcher from Pennywise. He has the craziest Fletcher story I think I've ever heard. You're gonna want to listen to this whole thing, and, you know, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. All right, without further ado, let's get into this episode. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Tone Mob Podcast, a show about guitar stuff, occasionally, sometimes. I'm your host, Blake Weiland, and with me today I have Reverend Peyton. What is going on, dude?
Oh man, everything's going on.
This is exciting.
Album release week.
Oh man, it's a big week. It's a big week. Is, yeah. As people hear this, it was last week, but so go listen to it. But yes.
Perfect.
Links to that are wherever the words are, because these things used to only go out on a couple platforms, and now the podcast goes out on YouTube, and Spotify does video. Now, I don't know. I never know where people are listening or watching to it, because, yeah. So I say where the words are, that's where the links are. Wherever the words are, go there.
Perfect. That's perfect. There's so many different things you gotta like follow now, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's nonstop. It's there's every time we update anything, we have to update like 10 different social media platforms, and you never know who's seeing what or how it's really going out there. And you're at the mercy of an algorithm half the time. It's a strange world we live in now.
That is one good thing about podcasts is, for now, I'm sure this is going to change, but in the podcast apps, if you're subscribed, they pretty much all show up. You know, they show up, and whether you click on it or not is up to you. But it does at least say, here I am. I'm here for you.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. As long as folks are subscribing, that's what they got to do.
That's right.
So if you hear this, you got to subscribe.
That's right. Well, on whatever platform you're on, just hit that button. It'll put my melodious voice in your ears every week. Maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe that wasn't a good thing. Well, I'm stoked to have you here. I've been following for a long time your various escapades, and I remember when I first got involved with Stringjoy back in the day and found out you were one of our artists, I was like, oh man, this is cool. So I was excited to have you on and get the whole story, man. I don't know all the ins and outs and details of how you got into the things you're into, and I'd love to hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
Well, perfect. Well, I love it, man. I love talking guitars. I love, it's my whole life, Mm-hmm. And I love Stringjoy too. Let's shout out Stringjoy. I mean, that's a pretty cool company. You can go right to their factory and watch them make those strings right here in the US. I mean, that's pretty cool. And they can custom, like, that's one of the things I love is they can custom set a box up for you, because I'm always messing with string gauges, and we can get into that stuff later. But like, string gauge to me is something that is so fluid. I mean, I change string gauges depending on the guitar, the tuning, you name it. So, I'm back here. You can see there's a lot of guitars back here. Every single one of them set with a different string gauge on it, and most of them are custom that I come up with myself,
Beautiful. That's awesome. Yeah. And you've got I've got a lot of kind of the same thing going on back here, and you've got all sorts of different varieties and shapes and styles of stringed instruments back there. So you need variety. Cool. Yeah,
absolutely. It's funny. I've been gravitating toward, some of the same few guitars lately. It's with all these around, but the older you get, you kind of filter it down. But I love it, man. I mean, everything you can see behind me, I've got all kinds of like homemade cigar boxes, and I've got a Simbasaz from Turkey that's, you might be able to see just a little bit right there to the far left.
Oh yeah.
I've got all kinds of stuff, and then everything that all the pawn shop stuff that I'm more known for, and then all kinds of great Gibson and Fender and you name it. So I just love guitars, man. I'm real lucky. We used to live in a little tiny cabin for a long time, and I couldn't have really any space to set up any kind of rehearsal space like this. So for my whole life, we never really had a rehearsal space, never had a place to make demos, nothing. Everything was always just in my head. That was it. So this is since we moved here, which was in 2021, this was the first place we ever have had where I actually have a rehearsal space. It's set up to record. You know, I can keep all these things out and just be constantly messing with it. You know, it's really been great.
That makes a big difference for your, you know, we all have ideas swimming around in our heads all the time, but the ability to just grab an instrument and, you know, even phone demo it or whatever, and just get it down and actually, or maybe you have an idea and you try it and you're like, oh, that doesn't really work actually on this.
Yeah.
But you just process things so much faster.
Oh, absolutely. And coming up with the demos, like, you know, people probably wonder, you know, what we're doing here all the time. And, you know, for me, my process is usually more about writing and just kind of expanding my bag of tricks is how I'd say it.
Yeah.
So that I can use that to, you know, to sort of create, because for me, it's always just about like the next record, right? That's it. So having the ability to woodshed demos before we actually get in the studio. And actually this new record was made here at the house. I made it in the living room. I made it. It was so, you know, we're set up. We can do stuff like that. You know, I mean, who knows? Maybe in the future, I'll feel comfortable enough to make all kinds of records here. We'll see. But you know, this one was stripped down. It's very acoustic, so it lended itself to being able to do this. You know.
Well, let's take a few steps back, because like, as you said, you're obsessed with guitars to an extreme degree, as most people that listen to this show are. But when did that fascination start? When did you first pick up the instrument and be like, oh, this is my whole life. This is what it is?
Well, you know, my dad, who we lost him 5 months ago.
I'm sorry.
So it's still fresh, but no, thanks. It's been brutal, but it was my dad, and I'll tell you how. When I was 12 years old, he said, "Hey, we're gonna go get a guitar," and I said, "Well, you don't know how to play, and you can't afford a guitar." And he said, "I do know how to play, and I can't afford it." And so we went and we bought the cheapest K that they had on the wall. And I forget, it's like $90 or something. It was no amp, an electric guitar, Strat copy, a K Strat copy with no amp. We get this thing home, and the old man starts playing all kinds of stuff. He's playing Wipeout, Louie Louie, and like little blues runs, and he's playing just all kinds of old songs. You know, I couldn't believe it. I was like just absolutely shocked that he could play it all. I didn't know. You know, I was 12 years old. So for 12 years, I'd never seen him play a guitar. And apparently when I was born, he got hard up and he had to sell his guitar. And I didn't know this, you know, so like seeing him bang away on some chords and some riffs and stuff, it just blew my mind. So then I literally haven't put it down since. And I always tell people this, because I think it's the best way to describe how my life felt before the guitar and after. I love to go fishing. When you catch a fish, you pull it up out of the water, and maybe it's sitting on the ground while you're taking the hook out, and it's flopping all around. It looks real stupid. Its mouth's moving, and it just looks ridiculous, right? And then you put it back in the water, and it's like magic. You can't believe how this thing can move in the water and how it can swim. It's beautiful. It's like a miracle, right? And that's how I felt when I was first handed a guitar. I felt like I've been put back in water.
Yeah.
And it's been like that ever since, with no sign of slowing down. Thankfully, I hope to always be this insane and passionate about it. Now, I had a guitar tech who was complaining to someone else about how I'm always messing with him, you know, always tweaking things, you know. And he's like, "You can't ever leave anything alone." And it's like, well, it's not what I'm doing. I'm not just messing with it to mess with it. It's about just trying to squeeze out just that much, just little itty bitty incremental amounts of tone, right? And you know, for me, if I can get 1% more, like if doing something, if I can get this and it's 1% better, then that's worth it to me. You know, I mean, 1% is huge in terms of guitar tone, as far as I'm concerned. So I think not everybody can hear the difference.
I think there's that, and it's not the one thing that you do, though. It's not the one thing that you did that was 1%. It's the 20 things that you did that were 1% that make it 20% better. You know?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Absolutely. And you know, and also too, like sometimes that changes. You know, like I get on a kick. You know, and I'm like, and I like, you know, X for a while. You know, Y was sounding good, but now X sounds good. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes that's just about, you know, as an artist chasing those avenues out. And the older I get, the more I allow myself to do it. You know, there was a certain time when I was younger where I went, this is what is done, so this is what I'm going to do. And, you know, I missed out on a lot. And, you know, one was pedals. Like when I was real young, I thought pedals were a crutch. I thought everyone that used a bunch of pedals was a joke. And, you know, I was always thumbing my nose at pedals. And now I'm like, that's stupid. Pedals are cool. You know, I mean, of course, like anything, you can go too far with it. But, you know, what's great about pedals is that you can stomp on something and it's a whole new setup now on stage instead of having to drag a whole different amp setup. When I was younger, mm-hmm. I just believed in having the second amp. It's like, oh, if I want this sound, then I want the second amp up there. You know what I mean? It's like we're going to have whatever it takes to have the real deal, whatever. And sometimes that hamstrings you because sometimes you can find a completely different sound within a pedal that, you know, can open you up to new ideas and new avenues that are, because even a new guitar is going to take you to new places. You know, I always say there's new songs in every new guitar you get. And it's the same with pedals. It's the same with amps. Every time you get something new, there's new songs in it.
What I love about pedals, especially now, I think it's more true than ever, is there are things that you can make with some of these pedals that they're just physically impossible otherwise. You can't do it. You cannot do it.
1,000%.
Yeah. So, mm-hmm. I mean, a good example, I've been obsessed with this. It just dropped this week, but my friends at Maris just released the Enzo X, and it's a synth. It's not even fair to call it an effects pedal. It's not. It's a synth that's in a pedal format that you can control with a guitar if you want to.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's what it really is at the end of the day, because it doesn't process your signal. It takes your signal and it says, "Oh, that's what he's doing. That means he wants me to do this," and then it outputs something completely different. So, like, you couldn't do that otherwise. So
no.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of cool companies making pedals now too. There's all kinds of boutique stuff. There's like a renaissance in boutique gear, boutique mm-hmm. amps, boutique guitars, boutique pedals, and the big companies are making better stuff than they've made in a long time.
Oh yeah,
you know, I mean, they really are. I mean, the stuff that Gibson is turning out of the custom shop, the stuff that Fender is turning out of the custom shop is really great. You know, mm-hmm. I mean, detractors say what you will, but I in my opinion, I think they're churning out wonderful stuff right now. It's like a renaissance in guitars. It might be the best time to be a guitar player in the history of guitars.
Well, I think it is. Even forget about the top end of things. The bottom ends came way up too. That 90s K you were talking about, or whatever year that was.
Yeah.
That thing was probably not super great, but you get a Squier now, pretty decent guitar.
I always say that. It's like the guitars I had to start out on were horrendous.
Yes.
And for almost the same price. Like it was like a $90 guitar in 92 or whatever, right? And no, 90, it would have been 94, 93. And mm-hmm. so you get a $90 guitar back then. You go right now to Guitar Center and spend $110 on a Squier, and you've got a pretty nice guitar, especially if you play a few of them, make sure that you found one that's nice, go get it set up, get some nice strings on it. Boom. You're mm-hmm. so far ahead of the game now. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It's like we're living in crazy times, man.
Well, and people ask me, like, because I'm the guitar guy in the family, right? So anytime anybody's starting to come play guitar, they're like, well, what should I get? They want to play electric guitar. And I'm like, well, really, like, you know, they need to kind of decide what style of music are they most into, because I've been asked this, should I get an acoustic guitar? I've been told they should start on an acoustic. I'm like, they should start on whatever is going to make the music that they want to make. Because I was kind of forced to start on an acoustic, and mm-hmm. I now love the acoustic guitar. But back then I was like, I just want to play metal. I don't want to play, like, I don't want to do this. I want to play metal. That's what was exciting to me, or punk or whatever. And, mm-hmm. Had I not been so bullheaded and determined to eventually get there one day, I might not have stuck with it. And I don't think putting barriers is good. So I'm always just like, play whatever they gravitate towards guitar wise, go with that. And then get a Boss Katana.
100%.
Yeah.
That's 1,000%. When I was a kid, when I was 13, I started giving guitar lessons, and I gave guitar lessons all through high school.
Nice.
And that was one of the things that I always told people. I'm like, bring in the music that you want to play. And, and back then there wasn't tabs for everything. So I had to figure it all out by ear. So I would always just have them bring in whatever CDs they liked. And then I would just figure it out and teach them how to play it. Like, that's what I always did, because and so you're so right. It's like, get the guitar the kid likes, find out what music they like, try to find something that's going to match it, because if they're going to play the stuff they like, they're way more likely to stick with it. And also too, when I was a kid, this is what happened to me. My dad was always into like real blues influenced rock, and blues stuff, but like the Rolling Stones, Johnny Winter, 10 Years After, CCR, and then like British Invasion stuff and Cream and whatnot. So that was what I was, sort of fed when I was a kid, was a lot of that stuff, which I love and still do. But I would listen to that and go, okay, you look at the liner notes and go, okay, so this song was by Willie Dixon. This one was by Muddy Waters. Like, who are those guys? And I'd go back and listen to them. And then I would be like, well, who influenced them? Because I think they're awesome. I want to know who influenced them. And I would go back and back and back until you get to guys like Charlie Patton and Bucka White and Son House and those early country blues guys that really, paved the way for everybody else. And that's kind of how I gravitated towards. So just because a kid starts off playing one thing doesn't mean they're going to end up playing that. You teach someone how to play the guitar, and then if they're into it, it is an infinite, unwinnable game where you just try to learn everything you can. And it's just nonstop. And you think, how can there be so many songs in this instrument? But really, the guitar, in my opinion, and of course I'm a damn guitar player, so of course it's going to come from me to say this. But in my opinion, the guitar is just about the most perfect instrument. And the reason is not just because of how vocal it is, because it can be so vocal. It can emulate the human voice better than almost any other instrument, right? But what I love about the guitar, and really any stringed instrument, is you take that string and you cut it in half, and there's your octave every time. And then the intervals, once you find those intervals, they're always the same, right? It's just spread out a little bit depending on the string length. So you find your scale, and now you know everything. And, with slide, which is, really, slide is kind of my number one. Fingerstyle slide guitar is really my bread and butter. So, with slide, the frets are really just kind of a visual guidepost. But if you want to be good at slide, you kind of have to move way beyond the frets, because if you're going to be fast, one, you have to kind of just know where the slide's going to go. You can't be really thinking about it. And then also, most of your best like real vocalization, most of your best real emotion and feeling is actually between the frets and in places that are beyond the chromatic scale. So I think that nothing illustrates that better than a string. And the guitar is with its 6 strings and its makeup of frets, it really allows you to reach a lot of different octaves, a lot of different positions, chord shapes, everything. I mean, there's barely an instrument that can do this. You can't play chords like this on a horn. You can chord on a piano, but you can't bend the notes. You can't be as vocal on a piano as you can on a guitar. No way. The guitar has so many advantages, and you can pick it up and carry it out with you. And even if you need an amp, you put the amp in your other hand. You know what I mean? It's just, it's not as mobile as a harmonica, maybe, but it sure has a lot more potential. I think that's one of the reasons the guitar is stuck around. We're now reaching, I don't know, maybe we're looking at 100 years of the guitar dominating American music, which has dominated music in the world. And people are still doing stuff on the guitar every day that has never been done before.
That's a good point. That's something that I point out often, is because there's always this weird narrative in the guitar world for some reason. It's like, is guitar dying? Is the guitar gonna die? Is the guitar on its way out? And I'm like, It's the electric and acoustic guitar, as we think of them, is so entrenched in Western music at this point, and therefore all over the world. Like, are you going to remove one of the most identifiable pieces of musical culture and just throw it out forever? Is that going to happen? No, that's never going to happen at this point. It's just not. It's crazy that it's a question.
Well, and if people care, right? If you care about the guitar, if you care about this stuff, if you think it matters, then people need to support it and stop saying stupid things like no one makes any good music anymore, because that's ridiculous. There might be more. It might be the music being made right now might be the best music that's been made in the last 50, 60 years. I mean, it's like, we live in a time where it's interesting. We have 100 years of American music that has dominated. So we have that whole history. So we have all of that to sort of mine influence from. So in a way, it does sometimes feel probably like it's a little bit harder to craft something new than it was in 1957 when it all was new, right?
Right.
You go back to 57 and it's like, no one had heard of Johnny Cash. Now Johnny Cash shows up on the radio. Elvis shows up. No one's heard of Howlin' Wolf. Howlin' Wolf shows up. No one's heard of Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry shows up. Little Richard shows up. All these people just like that year is kind of incredible to me. 55, 56, 57, where all like everything that we know that really started really shape the culture and become pop culture in terms of rock and roll and blues. Like boom, it just happened in 57. It's kind of amazing. 55 to 67. So we have that retrospect. So yeah, you can't go and maybe it's a little harder to craft something new because a lot's been done, but it's infinite. So there's still tons of songs yet to be found. There's tons of melodies yet to be found. There are all kinds of new tones and new shapes, and I think that it's a little bit. What's the word? Maybe defeatist. I don't know. I think it's just ridiculous to think that new music can't be made and that we aren't in actually a wonderful time to be a player, because access to it is never been easier. And even though having all of this history makes it a little bit more difficult maybe to find something that hasn't been done before, we do get to live in a time where we have all this history to influence everything that we're doing and to mine ideas from.
Well, and who's to say that it has to be a completely novel and new thing to be cool or interesting? Everything builds upon the stuff that came before it, no matter if you want to, even if you tried to ignore it, it's impossible to do.
Yeah.
But who's to say that like somebody can't do something similar to a Howlin' Wolf thing that's not exactly the same because it's not him, but it's still cool. I mean, who's to say that you like Nirvana was just trying to do the Pixies? They didn't do it. They did Nirvana, but that's what Kurt Cobain famously said that all the time. I was trying to sound like the Pixies, and they don't sound, in my opinion, anything like the Pixies, hardly. So
yeah, well, and that's one of the interesting things. Like, I think Kurt Cobain's one of those interesting cases too, because people wouldn't think of him as a student of music, and he always said he wasn't, but he obviously was. He loves stuff like the Pixies. He actually was a student of music. He just wasn't a student of music in the way that he thought people normally were. But for the most part, what you do is you listen to the stuff you like, you learn that, and then you take all of the stuff and you try to filter it through yourself. And one of the interesting things about creating, in my opinion, is that I think the best creators, the best real innovative, the best real unique artists, they have studied extensively, but then they figure out a way to almost forget all that, and try to find as close to just what is uniquely themselves as possible. It's like Kurt Cobain may have set out to sound like the Pixies, but Kurt Cobain was uniquely himself. In fact, so much so that I would argue that there hasn't been anyone since that really sounds like that. Almost everybody that's tried has fallen short. Yeah. Everybody. I always make this claim that when it comes to Nirvana and Pearl Jam, as much as everybody loves, both those bands, Pearl Jam was the one that actually changed more people followed in Pearl Jam's footsteps than they did Nirvana's footsteps. And I think it's because what Pearl Jam did felt a little bit more attainable. And that's not to knock Pearl Jam. It's just what Kurt did was just, I mean, in a way, it's hard to describe almost. His music, while simple, nobody sounds like that. It's a lot like John Lee Hooker. I always say that about John Lee Hooker. People say, oh, John Lee Hooker's easy to play. And I'm like, well, you know what? I've been playing music since I was 12 years old. I've been playing blues since I was, 12 and a half, 13. And like, I've never heard anyone that could sound like John Lee Hooker. Right? Like I can play those parts. I know people that can play those parts, but they don't sound like John Lee Hooker. Not even close. You know what I mean? And the same is said of Kurt. Say what you will. Oh, those songs are easy. They're power chords. They're this, they're that. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, well, then show me someone that sounds like Kurt Cobain. I'm still waiting. Since 94 or whatever. Still waiting for someone that sounds like Kurt Cobain. And we've been waiting how many years is for someone that sounds like John Lee Hooker? How many times have you heard the damn song Boom Boom, played? I've heard it played 1.5 million times, and I've never heard anyone that sounded like John Lee Hooker, No. And I think that's kind of a lesson too for artists. And at least, and I try to take my own advice when I can, is that you're not going to really be able to sound like those guys because they were themselves. They were just so 1000% themselves. Like Kurt Cobain woke up in the morning and he couldn't help it. He was Kurt Cobain. He may have wanted to be the Pixies. He may have wanted to be someone else, but he was Kurt Cobain. The same of John Lee Hooker. The same of Chuck Berry. These guys wake up and they're who they are. And as an artist, as a guitar player, if you can wake up and that happens, like that, in my opinion, that is that's kind of the goal. There's 1 billion guitar players. The guitar's been the number one instrument in America for 100 years, and if you can sound like yourself, like that is that's something I've been chasing my whole life.
Yeah, it's something that until the last maybe 5 years, I didn't really give myself the permission to be that way. I was always like, I need to get better. I need to get shreddier. I need to get, I need to learn this part better. I need to do blah, 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 blah. And now for the last 5 years, I couldn't hardly tell you in my memory the last time I attempted to play somebody else's music. Yeah. Like, you got to learn other people's music to learn the instrument, typically speaking. But now I'm at a point where I'm like, I just pick it up and whatever comes out, comes out. And I don't view it as putting in the work as much as I used to. It used to be like, I got to put in this work so I can improve. And now it's, I want to write stuff. I want to mess around. I want to explore. And I don't care if I haven't quite figured out how to utilize the scale properly or not. I don't care. I just don't care anymore.
I've always been similar. Like I never, well, I don't want to say never. When I was a kid, I did a little bit, but my goal wasn't to learn someone's solo note for note. Like I never went and was like, okay, I have to make this perfectly exactly the way they did their solo, right? But I would learn their solo. So I knew what they did and be like, okay, so what are they really doing? Then I would filter it down like, okay, so what he's doing, okay, really he's in pentatonic and he's in this, the BB King box here and he's here. Like I would learn it so that I knew I could do it. And that's kind of how I do now. Like if I hear something on the guitar, listen to something, go, whoa, what's going on there? I will just make myself figure it out. And I try to make myself figure it out by ear, even still. Like I think that to me, that has been kind of the secret. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so good at slide is that I've made my ear be as powerful as I possibly could in terms of figuring out that tonality. So I can, because ultimately as a player, when you're going to create a solo, when you're going to make a riff or run, it's got to be musical, right? We're not just running scales. That's what, and you can hear the difference. If you really search your soul and you listen to stuff that really fires you up, there's certain people out there that can shred, they can play the notes, they can burn them up so fast. And there's like, whoa, how'd that happen? And then there's people that play something and it makes you feel something. And if you really get into your playlists and stuff, you're going to see that that's the stuff that's coming up more. You're gravitating more toward that stuff that actually is more vocal. Right. So if you can actually kind of learn to speak that language instead of just thinking the language, right? It's a difference between, being able to read Spanish and be able to speak it back.
Right.
Be able to read Italian and be able to speak Italian back, right? It's a very similar thing. And music is a language. It really is. It's just another language, and there's different accents. That's one interesting thing about music. It has different accents. You can put a Latin accent on it. You can put an African accent on it. You can put an Irish accent on it, right? And some of that is comes down to the scales, or some of it comes down to microtonal stuff. That's one of the things about blues that I've been talking about lately, where I think a lot of people get it wrong. And one of the things that they do is they think that it's a chromatic pentatonic scale when it is not. And if you want it to sound more real, if you want to be able to speak that language, then it is microtonal, as what most people would say, but it's actually just kind of a different scale. It's more West African. The thirds flatted, the sevenths are flatted, and those are flatted to a real space. So like if you're in E and you're bending that third fret up, you don't bend it up to nowhere. You bend it up to a note. Yeah, you bend it up to a note, and that's the language. When especially if you go back to earlier stuff, you listen to Fred McDowell, Son House, Charlie Patton, and even like someone like B.B. King. If you really listen to where he's bending up those thirds and bending the sevenths and stuff, it's to a real place. It's not just to infinity. It's not just bending that note up. It's to a note, because in outside the European scale, the chromatic European scale, other places might cut up the same intervals into 23 notes instead of 12. So you can actually fret those. Like my symbasaz right there. It's like my thumb is right there. My symbasaz, that is cut up a very different way. Now it has almost all of the chromatic notes on it, but it has more because it's microtonal stuff to be able to get in and speak those accents. That it's a Turkish instrument, and it's funny because it also flats the thirds and the sevenths in a very similar way to where blues does, just with a different accent. It flats it a different way, and it gives you a few others that maybe aren't normally in your quote blues scale, and. I think that's something that oftentimes is missed. Vocally, we might do it, right? You might sing a song and vocally you're going to go do those same inflections. But the guitar is a vocal instrument. So if you're going to speak with a string, then you have to kind of think beyond the frets, whether you're playing with a slide or not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up some of that stuff, because just by accident the other night I was working on a demo for somebody, and I found the leads I was playing, which I don't even play a lot of leads. I'm more of like kind of a riff guy, but I was putting some leads on this part, and I was like, what is this? What am I doing here? And I'm like, oh, this almost kind of got like some Middle East type vibes to it, which was totally by accident. And then I'm thinking, where's that coming from? I don't really listen to any of that music. Where is this? Then I'm like working backwards, and I'm like, oh, this is not exactly Middle East. This is more like kind of an Eastern European thing. That's because you were listening to System of a Down a lot last week. Like, that's where that's coming. Yeah. It's just seeped in there by complete. I had to really think about, because this is not a world I live in really musically. So like, where are these lead line ideas coming from? Oh, that's where. Okay. It all comes full circle. So like accidentally using your influences sometimes it'll take you to weird places. Fun
will, and sometimes like for me, I have to be careful. I'll come up with something really cool and be like, wait a minute, that's too cool. What is that? That's something else. I don't know if I made that up. Right? I'm like obsessed with making sure that I'm not just ripping off melodies from something else. Like it's something new. It's something I'm kind of obsessed with, and partly because I've had so many of mine stolen.
Right. And then you wonder too, is like, did they hear my stuff and totally yoink it? Or it was one of those like, hey, great minds think alike moments, and then it just happened. You never really know for sure, but it's
there's a couple that are probably questionable, but there's a couple I know they just straight up. Okay. That's okay. Hey. It's what happens. It's tough, man. Here's a funny story too. I was at we played a show the other day. It was not that long ago. It was on this last tour, and this fella come up after the show and come up and talk to me, and he said, "Man, your version of Poor Until Payday is my favorite." And I said, well, I wrote that song. And he's like, you did? And I'm like, yes, I wrote it. It's my song. And I thought, man, there's people out there doing my songs, which is cool. But, I'm not like if someone does a Johnny Cash song, everyone knows it's Johnny Cash, right? Mm-hmm. They go, oh, that's a Johnny Cash song. But if you do a Reverend Peyton song, some people might know, but I'm not like exactly a household name. So I'm always like, man, if someone does one of my songs, that's awesome. Please do. Put it on a record, But, man, let people know. Let people know it was me,
That's how I've discovered some artists, is by the artist being like, hey, here's a song by this band. It's one of my favorite songs, and it's from insert band here. And then they play it. I'm like, wow, that was a really cool song. I'm going to look up that band later. So it does help.
1,000%. It does help. It does help. And, there's I hesitate to tell this story, but who cares? I'll tell it.
Let's go.
I was invited to be on a John Mellencamp record. And, it was really cool. It's been some years ago, and since then I've gotten to know Kenny Wayne Shepherd well. But years ago, before I knew Kenny Wayne, I heard that him and John Mellencamp and Jim Irsay, the owner of the Colts, were at at a Super Bowl somewhere talking about me and saying nice things, and it was really cool. And Kenny Wayne said that's how he found out about me, was actually from John, which is really cool. But I ended up on one of John's records. It was a couple of records ago, and it's all covers. It's called Other People's Stuff, and the song is just me on the guitar and John singing.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty cool. It's really stripped down, and I was always really proud of it because it was like, I'm a Southern Indiana guy, so around here, John Mellencamp is the biggest thing in Southern Indiana still to this day. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, he's Elvis Presley there, basically.
And like we always joke, because as we travel around the world, we played in 38 countries, and everywhere we go in the far reaches of the planet, it's John Mellencamp shows up on the loudspeakers, on the radio. Yep. So it's like he's everywhere. The guy's got more hits than most people realize, even. But so we recorded this song, and it was just me and him. We did it live in the studio with 2 RCA microphones hanging over our head, 2 RCAs from the 30s. It was really cool.
Cool.
And, but like, I didn't get my name on the back of the record, really. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't say featuring Reverend Peyton. It didn't say anything like that. So it was kind of a situation where I didn't really, like, no one was going to know that it was me. Right. And to this day, but people that it came out before, like I didn't know when it was coming out. Like I did it, and it took like a few years for it to come out, as records often do. And we were actually on the legendary Rhythm and Blues cruise. It was one of the years Buddy Guy was on it, and my phone started blowing up. Like we went into port, and I turned my phone on, and my phone started blowing up. And it was all these people that were like, "Hey, is that you playing guitar with John Mellencamp? It sounds like you." And, that was a really cool moment.
That's cool.
People were like, oh, like they could tell it was me, and I thought that was kind of neat. And it was people from all over the country, because it was the lead single off that record.
Cool. Yeah.
It was cool. But I've been talking about it more lately because, like I say, my name went on the back of the record. So I wanted people to know it was me, but it was, and I was proud of it. It's kind of my arrangement of it. It was the old spiritual song, Eyes on the Prize. And, I heard I kind of like before I went in there, we did a few songs, or a couple, and that was one like that I've been told in advance. He kind of wants to do Eyes on the Prize, wants to see what you do with it. So I come up with a really dark, stark country blues version of it, kind of like Blind Willie Johnson was what I was thinking in my mind. And but even then, trying to emulate Blind Willie Johnson, I couldn't strip myself out of it. People people knew it was me. So
yeah, you definitely. I mean, that's one thing that why I was so excited to talk to you, is because like you've been one of the most identifiable guitar players of kind of our generation, in my opinion. And I think it's a very interesting. It's interesting to hear you, like, your story as you started. It's not that different from a lot of us, but you really kind of just found your own lane, and I just really appreciate that about what you do, because it is unique. It's traditional, but it's your own thing, and And I wondered, like, when did the slide become so important to you? Because that's not something that most people start with, and I don't think you did either. So
No,
when did
I
that
didn't.
come into
I
the
didn't
picture?
start that way. Yeah, and there's I got a couple of stories about that. So, go back to when I'm really young, maybe 12, 13, like really kind of chasing that blues back, right?
Yeah.
And I got this CD called Bottles, Knives, and Steel. And that it's a compilation CD. I'm not sure when it was released. We could probably get on the internet and figure it out, and that CD, that compilation, I think that was it. That was like it, because the Bottles, Knives, and Steel is all about slides, bottlenecks, knives, steel was what people played slide with back in the 20s and 30s. And that just, I heard all that. And I just thought, oh my God, this is the coolest stuff I've ever heard in my life. Right. And then fast forward, because I chased slide a little bit, of course, after that. And I'm just being, into blues, there's a certain amount of slide that you get into. But when I was 18, I woke up and one morning and my hands hurt so bad that I couldn't move them. And it's particularly my pointer fingers of both hands. And it was especially bad on my fret hand, my left hand. And I mean, it wasn't just pain. It was locked up. It was just like my hand just didn't want to work, and it was devastating. And I went to the doctor. He said, "Hey, son, find something else to do with your life." Basically told me I was never going to play again.
Oh no.
And I was devastated. I had to let go all my students at the time. I had, as young as 7 and as old as 60 something. And I had to let go of all my students, say, hey, look, I can't do this anymore. I just can't play. And for almost a year and a half, I couldn't really play, and at least not fretting. And this hand, my right hand, my picking hand was messed up too. But I could play slide to a certain extent. So I spent a year and a half of just playing slide. That was it. Could not fret. And and because of that, it just really whipped me into shape. It was like, okay, I'm going to see what I can do. Because I thought, well, if my hands are if it's going to be like a disability, then I'll play slide. I'll be a slide player, So I just forced myself to it. And then I finally went to the Indiana Hand Center. And a doctor there looked at it and he said, look, I think I know what's wrong with your hand. He said, if I'm right, you'll be playing guitar again in 2 weeks. If I'm wrong, I'm going to cut half your tendon away and it'll be a longer recovery, but you'll be better. So when I woke up from surgery, I said, well, how'd it go? He said, you'll be playing again in 2 weeks.
Nice.
So it was all these cysts, these ganglion cysts, and I'm prone to it. I still get them. Since then, I've learned how to deal with them. Like I kind of do like active release therapy or grass, and I have to do it all the time. I'll get like a big coin or the edge of a metal implement, and I just grind on them while they're still small. And it hurts like an SOB, but I can usually get them to go away before they become debilitating. And it's just been something I've been plagued with. And I think it has to do with, I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I'm super flexible. People that are listening aren't going to be able to see some of the stuff I can do. Like, look how wide my hand can go. Isn't that
That's
crazy?
Gnarly. Whoa.
I've never met anyone that can open their hand as wide as me.
Now, this is all I got. That's the best I can do.
To NBA basketball players, look, I can almost make my pinky and pointer be straight in a straight line.
Wild.
That's crazy.
Whoa.
So
we've got the teaser clip for this podcast all lined up.
yeah, absolutely. So after that period, after my surgery, I was back to playing again, but like with a new focus, right? Like while I was still bandaged up, I met Breezy. And, my wife, Breezy, who plays washboard in the Big Damn Band, she really kind of inspired me to chase the music that I really wanted to do and really focus on that. And I just decided, I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to chase all this other stuff. I'm not going to be this. I'm not going to be that. I want to be this. And it's this or nothing. And, between having a year and a half of forcing myself to only play slide. So because of that, I was doing stuff with the slide that I never heard anyone else do because I was just kind of forced to. It's like, well, if I want to play this music, then I've got to do it with the slide. So it kind of just forced me to do things like that. And then I just really just settled in like it's going to be finger style or nothing. And then something like really like at that point really switched in my brain. And because when it comes to fingerstyle country blues, particularly like the syncopated stuff where you're playing two things at once, it's less about your hands and more about your mind. And, you know, you can teach your hands to kind of go through the motions, but if you really want to be good, you have to teach your thumbs to be completely separate from what your fingers are doing. Mm-hmm. And if you really want to be able to do it and improvise and create and live inside of that space, you have to really teach your hands to be just separate. You know, I've taught my thumb and finger to be as separate as possible on my picking hand, and the same with a lot of times I'm holding over the top the bass lines with my thumb on the top of the neck with my fretting hand. And it really that's more mental than it is actually like dexterity. And
right,
you know, I mean, you need. I mean, obviously, you need to have a certain amount of dexterity to figure all that out, like anything on the guitar. But it's definitely, I think, in my opinion, in my mind, the way I think about it, it's more mental, being able to separate that out. And I just focused on it, man. It was like, this is who I am, and this is what I want to do. And every now and then, someone will say to me, like, I was asked this question yesterday in an interview. They said, were there other people around that were doing that? And it's like, well, not really. You know, not necessarily, not really. I mean, here in Brown County, Indiana, this is, has always been one of the bluegrass capitals of the world. This is where Bill Monroe has his music park and campground. It's where the oldest traditional bluegrass festival on the planet is here, you know, and we went to those when I was a kid, and I love music and guitar. So I love going to those, but, you know, bluegrass never really spoke to me in the same way blues did. You know, I mean, I listen to some bluegrass. I listen to all kinds of stuff. The older I get, the more I'm listening to my playlists are so diverse, they probably freak people out, you know?
Yeah.
but as far as the music that's inside of me has really always been blues, country blues, R&B, you know, part of it's the way I hear rhythm. I think like bluegrass is very straight, bop, bop, bop. Yep. It's just so straight. And I just love stuff that swings a little bit, you know? And, you know, sometimes like being my drummer is a pain because I make it be swung so hard, you know, even when it's fast, it's easier to swing slower, but it's hard to swing when it's fast. And I'm like, man, even when it's fast, it's got to swing. It's got to pockets got to be deep on a drummer for me. You know, I just want that stickiness to me. Just like, I don't know, that's just where I feel it. It's where I live. And it also, you know, maybe as a slide player, it allows you to kind of stick things a little more when there's that extra little bit of swing, you know. Mm-hmm.
I've always felt, and maybe this is just me wanting this to be the case because this is the background I come from. I've always felt like there's a little bit of punk rock in there somewhere for you. Is that accurate?
Well, you know what's crazy is I never listened to that stuff growing up, ever. Not even a little bit. Not even once. Like I didn't go to Warped Tour in high school. You know what I mean? I didn't know. Mm-hmm. I didn't listen to that at all. But so what happened though is when we first started touring, you know, we were homeless. We lived in a van and just traveled around. But we had a weird thing happen. So we got booked for Milwaukee Summerfest, and they called us up and said, "Hey, we screwed up. We put you on the wrong day. Can you come this day instead?" And it was like 2 days before we were supposed to be there. And luckily, we actually had the day off. So we're like, okay. So we showed up and we were there a day early. But we was a better slot because we got to be direct support for this band, Flogging Molly.
Which maybe
you heard of.
I'm a huge fan. Yeah, huge fan.
Yeah, they're awesome, you know. Mm-hmm. So some of the guys from Flogging Molly, like 3 of the 7, they sat and watched our whole set from the wings, you know. And afterwards we hung out. They were like, "Oh my God, this is we love your band." And Dennis Casey would message me from time to time, asking me about some of the songs.
I love that guy.
Dude, awesome. He's an awesome guy. You know, he's an awesome guy. And he started texting me, being like, "How do you play this song? You know, like what are you doing on this song?" And he got real into country blues for a while, you know, and because he's a student of the guitar still to this day, you know. I mean, he just, you know, he loves guitar and he's always messing with tone and stuff too, like the rest of us. But so he kind of spearheaded it first. He said, "Look," he goes, "I want you to be on the Screen 17 tour, but we got to convince everybody else." And he's like, "Why don't you come out?" And I think it was 3 or 4 shows in the Deep South. Come open up. We were first of 4 I was like, we're playing like as people are coming in the door, but it went so well. We ended up landing their entire Green 17 as direct support one year. And that actually changed my life. It was like
what year was that?
That was 2008. Which is crazy.
Okay, I caught that tour. That's why this is in my brain. I caught that tour. Okay, yeah. This all makes sense now. I was I as you're saying this, I'm like, I am almost 100% sure that the times I've seen you was with Flogging Molly, and then you said that, like, yes, that 100%. I remember.
So like, we went out there and we had no idea what this was going to be like. My brother was way more like. He had seen Flogging Molly at Warped Tour, I think. My little brother was the drummer at the time. He's since retired from the road. He hated being on the road, but I went and I didn't know. You know what I mean? Like, I have always just immersed myself in country blues. So we went out on this tour, and it was like, oh my God. I remember the first night. We're the first night of this tour. We're in Austin, Texas, and so like there was a band that would play. Then us, then Flogging Molly, every day. Now that third band that was the opener, it rotated out between three bands. One leg was one band, one leg was another. But the first band was this band that's no longer a band anymore. I won't say their name. They were a good band though, but I won't say them just because the story. I don't know if I'd want to be said if it was me, but basically they got booed off the stage. They got bottled. They were throwing stuff at them. It was horrible. It was one of the most terrible things I've ever seen. I mean, I was absolutely horrified. And I'm like, oh my God, we're going to have to go out there. And like, they were a big band. They had keys and a fiddle and like all kinds of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, they had all kinds of stuff. And we were drums, washboard, and me. And I'm like, oh my God, what is this going to be? So we had to go out there and just, I thought, well, I'm just going to do it 200%. We just went out and did it, and we won them over, and we did it every night. And that tour actually changed my life. After that, we had a house, and I was actually had crew on the road. Like, it really changed everything. Went from being homeless, living in a van to being able to have a home and have crew and stuff. It was really a big deal. And so like, after that, for our first record label that we got signed to was kind of a punk rock label, because they went on that tour, and so it was Flogging Molly's label at the time, and they saw how well we were doing. They just kind of wanted to sign us because of that. So for a while we were on this punk rock label, and we had done stuff with Flogging Molly. So in a lot of people's minds, we kind of got associated with that, which really in my mind, I thought I was baffled. You know what I mean? I'm like, going, what is this? But in a way, I think like it makes sense to me now in retrospect, if you look at like Flogging Molly's fans and how they came to be. So, Flogging Molly told me the thing that changed their life was going on Warped Tour. Well, imagine you go to Warped Tour, and I don't know what year they first started doing it, 97 or 98 or something like that, right? You go to Warped Tour, and there's at that time lots of pop punk bands, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's like the heyday of pop punk stuff is on Warped Tour. And then you see Flogging Molly. And it's like, whoa, what is this? They're going to stick out like a sore thumb. Yep. So it's not just that they're good. It's that the timing was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable, So with us going out with them, I think those fans were fans that were like, they're looking for something that was a little different, something that's new, something that's not exactly this, that, or the other. They had, most of those fans, I don't want to say most, but I'm guessing a lot, had no idea where we were coming from musically at all. Didn't know what country blues was, or hill country blues, or Piedmont guitar picking, or anything. They had no idea what that was. They just liked our vibe. And, they liked that coming from the same way they when they saw Flogging Molly at Warped Tour, and it fired them up. And I think that was the similar thing that happened with us. It just kind of, we were just right place at the right time with them. And, It really changed things. But in a way, I had to fight for a while, because every now and then, like, there'd be blues fests that go, oh, you're a punk band. We don't book punk bands. And I'm like, we're not a punk band. We've never been a punk band. I couldn't. Now I know more. I've been given an education in punk rock, but like at the time, I couldn't have named 5 punk rock bands, outside of like whatever the pop punk thing was, and the Ramones. You know what I mean? Like, I couldn't do it, and it it was always funny to me that we, for a minute, like it was kind of like there was like that double-edged sword. Like it made us in a certain extent. It gave us a career, but it also, in a way, we had to fight it for a while in certain communities because they were like, "Oh no, you're a punk band. You're on a punk label." And it's like, well, we're not. I never was that. And it's funny too because now there's like a lot of these punk bands that like went on to have like this roots music like career.
It happens if you're in a punk or a metal band long enough. Eventually, you start doing dark country stuff. At some point.
Yeah, and I always wondered. I'm like, man, I guess that was never my thing. Like I started off playing country blues. Like it never was like I never ever was in a punk band. Like my band in high school was a blues band. And I played in a lot of like bands with older guys like that I always call like the animal circuit, the Elks Lodges and the Lions Clubs and stuff like that. Yep. And I would play lead guitar for some of those older guys. And it was always basically like blues or blues heavy covers or things like that. You know what I mean? Like it was never like, oh, we're going to play this punk thing. Like I never really did it. I mean, as punk as it got was when I was like 12 or 13 and I'm trying to learn everything and I'm learning Nirvana songs or something. You know what I mean? Right. Like it was like, that was about as punk as it got. Like I just never really, I learned some Green Day for some students when I was in high school. To my students, I gave guitar lessons to, stuff like that. But like, I just never really, it was never really my thing. I actually like it more now than I did, largely because, you get an education going out with a band like Floggy Molly. They're steeped in it. They're steeped in Irish music and punk music, and they are steeped in it. Like they're historians.
It's kind of funny though, because saying all that, especially now getting the full backstory, one of the most punk rock things you could do would be playing country blues for a punk crowd. Really.
Well, man, I'll tell you a crazy story. You want to hear a crazy story?
Of course I do.
How much time we have? We got time.
Hey, I got all day.
Cool. Well,
I got all day for you, buddy.
Well, good. Mm-hmm. So, this is a story that I haven't really told, but I want to tell you a story. So, we actually got invited to do Warped Tour. Okay. One of the last years of Warped Tour. And it was crazy. It was like we were the odd one out. But it ended up being huge for us, and to a certain extent, like we, I don't know, like. If it was like changed our life or our career, or anything, but it was a fun thing to do. And it actually was a big education in music. And it was like being on punk rock summer camp, rock and roll summer camp anyway. And it's also wild too, because anyone that ever did Warped Tour will tell you it's the hardest kind of touring you can do, hands down. And anyone that thinks touring's hard, they've not toured until they've done Warped Tour. Warped Tour is hands down the hardest tour you can do.
Because it's every day.
Every day. You have to be there at 7 a.m. You find out at 8 or 9 a.m. when you play. No one knows when they play. And because it's kind of like this deal where there's no headliners and there's no openers. It's so like you might play at 10 a.m. or you might play at 8 p.m. and you find out at 8 or 9 a.m. that morning. Mm-hmm. And so like you're just kind of waiting until you figure that out. And so you cannot really plan your day. And you can't leave until everything's packed up and everyone's ready to go pretty much. So you are there all day. And then you're driving all night and it's all over and over again. And there might be one shower for 1,000 people on the tour. I mean, it's no joke, no exaggeration. It is tough, The catering is good, but everybody's in catering together, right? So long lines and the heat in the parking lot. Like there's no like I say, there's no headliners, man. It's you're there with everybody. And so because of that, you get to meet a lot of people. And so we were playing and this one day, and there's this giant dude punching the stage in the wings along with our music.
Okay. Oh.
And I only noticed him because the whole crowd we're playing, because we got put on one of the main stages. So we're main stage. There's thousands of kids out there watching. And I look over and they're all watching this dude beat the stage. And he's a monster. A monster. And I didn't know, but it was Fletcher from Pennywise.
Oh yeah, he is a monster.
He's a monster. And in fact, he has like Frankenstein studs tattooed on his neck and like Frankenstein scars tattooed on him. He knows he looks like Frankenstein's monster, and he is a monster, you know.
He's huge. Yeah.
He is huge. So I can't believe I'm going to tell this whole story. I'm going to tell the whole story. I've never told this whole story outside of I've never told on a podcast, but I'm going to tell you. Fletcher, like we got to be buddies, you know, and he'd come up to me after the show, and how it started was he'd come up to me and he goes, "Hey, you're the most punk rock on this tour." And he's like, "I want you playing with me every day. You're going to come up and play Bro Hymn with us every day."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay." And my tour manager at the time goes, "Do you know who that was?" And I go, "No." He goes, "That's Fletcher from Pennywise. Do you know what he's talking about?" And I'm like, "No, I don't know." And so I listened to it and I went, "Oh, I know that song. That's amazing." Right? You know?
Yeah.
So I had to learn, you know, Bro Hymn, and I did a little slide thing. It kind of sounds Western when I did it. Wah, 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 wah. I kind of did that. But anyway, every day that our shows didn't, you know, like overlap, I'm playing with Pennywise every day. Just like
that's fantastic.
And he would bring me out and go, "This is the most punk rock on the tour." And like I would have to like wave like the Queen, you know, like, like I just didn't know what to say or do, you know. And it's like, man, if that guy says do something, by God, you do it, you know.
That's right.
I'm not a small guy, and standing next to him, man, I look like I'm, you know, like a munchkin from the Wizard of Oz. Like I am just like, I mean, I look tiny next to that dude. He's probably 6'7".
Yeah.
And just massive, you know.
Yeah.
And famous for getting into fights. Mm-hmm. You know, like that's kind of his deal. Is like, and there's been some people that whose asses he's kicked have really kind of deserved it. So if you go back in his history, I won't say who, but you go back through and there's some people that you're like, oh, that they needed a little tune up, and he hooked them up with it. But but the one I'm going to tell you about, these guys didn't deserve it.
Okay.
So we you know, every day I'm with him. But well, one day I got a chemical burn in my eye.
Okay. Whoa.
And we didn't know what it was, but I that day I was I'd been on stage like at that point, like, you know, 6 or 7 bands would have me up on stage with them, you know. So I'm playing with all kinds of people, and it was just it was crazy. Like the Casualties, Andrew WK. There was they had let's see, the Oompa Loompas, because Willy Wonka Candy was like a sponsor on the tour. So like literally just Oompa Loompas on stage. You can find this video on YouTube somewhere, probably, I think, because it was up there. But I'm standing there and I look like I want to die, but it's because I did. My eye was so bad that if I looked at light, I threw up. So I just thrown up, and I'm up there, you know, playing like a Ramones song with Andy WK and the Casualties and all these people, you know. And I walked off that stage and went, "Breezy, I got to go to the hospital. Something's wrong." So we go to the hospital. We're up in Canada, and I was there 8 hours before they saw me. And they basically said, "Hey, we don't have an eye specialist here. You need to go to an eye specialist in the United States when you cross the border again."
Jeez.
So they told me to put an eye patch on. So I had an eye patch on, and I crawled into my bunk. Luckily, we had 2 days off so we could cross the border. And I crawled into my bunk on the bus, dude, and I was there in the dark for 2 days. When I had to cross the border, they put a blanket over me. And I walked inside, and they pulled it off, and my eyes all messed up looking. The guy's like, "Oh, God." I think they thought I was doing some kind of Michael Jackson thing. Like, "No, look at my face." But I just literally, like, any light made me throw up, you know. So I go, and after 2 days of being in my bunk, I was feeling better, you know, not perfect, but good enough to where I could, like, be outside. And, you know, what it was basically I had to get used to the eye that wasn't in the eye patch being able to focus without the other one, because the eye that had the burn, it actually, when it would focus, it would hurt. That was kind of the deal. So I had to, you know, that eye had to just get used to being, you know, non-existent. And at that time, I didn't know it was a chemical burn. We didn't know what it was. We knew there was a damage to it, but we didn't know what it was. And luckily, it didn't affect my vision in the long term. If anyone's wondering, it just was short term, but I will have a permanent scar on my eye that you can see. Like when an eye doctor looks at you with that microscope thing, they can see it on there. But
it's all hits home with me. The listeners
it was
know
terrible.
I had a serious eye injury in 2011. I didn't quite skate out as good as you did, but
really, yeah, well, I ended up being okay, but it was terrible. So I at one point, Breezy leans into my bunk during that 2-day period, and she goes, "Hey, Fletcher from Pennywise wants to say goodbye. They're jumping off the tour because they were only on for 2 or 3 weeks, and we were doing the whole summer." So I'm like, okay, and I was wanting to say goodbye to him and talk to him and thank him, but I also kind of hoped I didn't, because I felt like I was dying and didn't want to see anybody. I wasn't eating, wasn't doing anything. So when I finally come out of the hole, I crawl out. We had a golf cart on that tour. And after that, I guess bands got golf carts, but I couldn't afford to have enough crew. So my idea was, I'll get a golf cart and it'll save us, because I found one real cheap on Facebook Marketplace. I'm like, okay, I'll get a golf cart and it'll save us. So my crew had a golf cart that we could use to move stuff before and after the show. That saved us a little bit. And so I'm riding my golf cart around in the morning, and actually Breezy was driving me around, I believe, because I had an eye patch. I couldn't drive. My depth perception was all messed up. And have you ever heard of a band called Alesana? So Dennis from Alesana is talking to me, and he starts saying something. He's going, and I'm like going, wait a minute. I don't understand. What are you saying? Like whatever he was saying wasn't computing in my brain, And he started going, what are you talking about? Like he thought I was messing with him, pulling his leg. And I go, brother, I don't know what you're talking about. I've been in the bunk for 2 days. Look at my eye, dude. Like I don't know what has happened. And so he was the first person that told me. Apparently, Fletcher had what he wanted to come and say goodbye to me. And he knew on our bus, man, mi casa su casa. Come on in. If there's something, you want something to drink, something to eat, just pull it out the fridge and eat it, Yeah. So he gets on Alesana's bus, and he's making himself a sandwich. He's pouring vodka. And he's drinking their stuff. And they come back, and Alesana's got a bunch of people in the band. I don't know how many, I forget, but like 7. They had all this crew, as many crew as band, I think, and then they've got an entourage. And Dennis tells this story from Alesana. He says this to me. He goes, "Rev, we came on the bus, and there's this monster eating our food and drinking our stuff, and we're like, hey, this is our bus. Get off." And he said, "This is Reverend Peyton's bus, and you better get off of it before I kill you." And they're like, no. And the argument ensues. Well, he said, then it becomes fisticuffs, right? And this is Dennis describing it. Dennis said, he goes, "Rev, I climbed Fletcher like a tree." And he reached back. He goes, "I'm beating his head from climbing on his back." He said he reached back, grabbed him by the shirt, and threw him across the bus with one hand.
I believe it. Yep. And
so he said it was all of us versus him. And he said, we're losing bad. He said, he's just destroying us, tossing us like toys, And he said, then finally he stops and goes, wait a minute. This, and they're thinking, good, like this guy maybe is going to come to senses. He goes, let's take a break so I can pour another drink. And he pours vodka in it, and they rush him again. And I guess then he takes the vodka bottle and smashes it on the counter, cracking the counter and the bottle. And now he's got like a glass knife, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. And he comes at him with that. And at that point, he said they all ran for their lives, and someone called the cops. Cops show up. And now this is Fletcher telling it. Apparently, they had to tase him 5 times to take him down. Took 5 tasers, like actually stuck in. Mm-hmm. And he said it's because he used to be an electrician and is used to electricity. But I know it's because the dude is a monster, Yeah. He's just so big.
He's 6'7" and 375 pounds.
Easy. Yeah. He's just a monster, Mm-hmm. So they take him to jail. Attempted murder was the charge. And basically Kevin Lyman, who owns Warped Tour, he's a great guy. He kind of mediated between the cops and Fletcher and Alesana. He said, look, Fletcher feels bad. He thought he was on Reverend Peyton's bus and was defending it. Mm-hmm. They ended up like saying, look, we'll drop all charges if he apologizes, because there was a rumor going around that he beat him up because they had like sexually assaulted a woman or something, and they just wanted that cleared up because that wasn't true at all. And because normally in the past, that's kind of what Fletcher had done. Fletcher hears about something like that, then he tunes you up for it,
Right. Mm-hmm.
So people were like, oh, well, Alesana must have done something. But they really didn't, they really didn't. And
they're just trying to get their bus back.
yeah. They're just trying. They were like, what is this? And they didn't recognize him, at the time. So he put out in a press release, and he did interviews, and it was in AP magazine, a bunch of stuff that he said, look, I'm sorry, I wasn't looking for any trouble. I was just looking for the Rev. And if it had been earlier in the tour, we would have put that on T-shirts probably on the Warped Tour, because it was it would have been great. But then later, I had him tell me that story again, but it was like this. He goes, "Man, did I ever tell you about what happened the last day I was on Warped Tour with you?" And I said, "No, tell me about it." Yeah. And I knew what had happened, but I wanted to hear it from him.
Sure, of course.
But it was it was pretty legendary little punk rock moment that I was caught up in that I had really nothing to do with it. It was pretty funny, man. And Fletcher is he's a legend. He's a wild man. He is. He's a wild man. And bro him, if that dude did nothing else the rest of his life, man, bro him is an iconic song. It's played at like every other hockey game on the planet.
100%. Yes, man. That is a great story. And that is, I don't know if there's a better way to wrap up this podcast, but I got a couple classic questions that I like to ask before we wrap it up, and then slide over to Patreon, see what other kind of nonsense we can dig up.
Cool.
But before I do that, I'd like to give the guests a chance to take the floor, shout out anybody you want to shout out, plug anything you want to plug, say hi to your grandma, whatever, the floor is yours. Well,
basically, I talk about the new record since the timing's right. We have this new record out. It's called Honeysuckle, and it's a very stripped down record. It's the most acoustic record we've done since Peyton on Patton. If anyone's a fan of that record from back in the day, it's all old guitars, old microphones, and old gear. And it's a lot of me, of course, but it's also got some big damn band on it. Breezy's playing the washboard on some songs and singing background vocals. My drummer Jacob is playing chains and tambourines and doing third harmony, which he's really, really good at. And then we have some special guests. We have Colton Crawford, the banjo player from the Dead South, is on a song. Mm-hmm. The McCrary Sisters, probably the best gospel vocal group alive currently, are on a song. Billy Branch, who is cool. A Blues Hall of Fame harmonica player, and Grammy Award-winning fiddle player Michael Cleveland, who might be the best fiddle player alive, is playing fiddle on a song. And it's it in that way, people have been describing it as more like a solo record, but it's not. It's like the most collaborative record I've ever done. And there's still tons of big damn band on there. Like there's songs on there that if Breezy hadn't played the washboard and lended her vocals to it, it wouldn't have been half the song. So I mean, it's funny that it's like that. But I will say this: it was going to be a solo record. I thought, I'm just going to make this acoustic record in the living room here this afternoon, And then I was like, man, some of these songs are pretty good. Like I think this is a real record here. It's a different thing, but if you're a fan of me at all, you're going to like the record. And, there's probably going to be some people out there that are into this more than other stuff. And maybe there's some people that, would prefer, the more plugged in stuff. But, I think that like, I feel like, like myself as a player and a writer comes through, it's not like this big giant departure. 'Cause, between you and me, a lot of the same stuff can be played on acoustic guitar and electric guitar.
What? Hold on. Let me check. Yeah. Let me Google that. I don't know if that's accurate.
Yeah. So, sometimes it's as much about aesthetic as it is catching a tonal vibe, but it is completely acoustic. There's nothing plugged in. So it's all, 1930 National Triolian, 1934 National Trojan, 1929 Gibson L2, like just lots of vintage stuff, vintage RCA microphones run through tube gear and stuff. It's it very much is that. And it was recorded upstairs in my living room, which has this big tall ceiling and it almost sounds like a kind of like a church vibe. to the way that it comes across. And there's a couple of gospel tunes on there, and some songs I wrote that are kind of borrow a whole lot from gospel music. And then there's some songs I've written that I'm super proud of, that are as blues as anything I've ever done. And then there's a couple of covers on there too, that which I normally don't put covers on a record, outside of like theme stuff like Peyton on Patton, which obviously was Patton songs. Sure. But I'm doing a couple of Blind Lemon Jefferson songs, Robert Johnson too. So like there's it's different, it's unique. I'm really proud of it. I really think people will like it.
Yeah. And everybody, go check that out. The link to his website with all the information and all that stuff is, of course, in the show notes or the description or wherever the words are. Go check all that out. It's really good stuff, man. I think if people weren't familiar with you before, this is the thing. I tend to kind of, focus in on my interests in who I'm interviewing and stuff. It's just how it works. Not on purpose. I'm not trying to exclude anybody. It's just, I want to talk to people that I appreciate, and you're one of those. But also, I think people would be surprised a little bit to hear that like this is in my repertoire of music that I listen to. So go check it out, and yeah, I'm really excited for you, man. You're doing good stuff, and going to continue to do so. So
thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, my final questions. I got 2 of them.
Okay.
First one: what is your favorite Boss pedal?
Boss pedal. Mm. Mm-hmm. Oh, the tuner.
That's the most popular answer.
It may be.
They've got to sell millions of those things at this point. Everybody's like, well, the tuner. I'm like,
yeah, the tuner, man. The tuner. That's the most iconic tuner pedal there is. Mm-hmm. And it's bomb proof. I use one of those. Now it's is it the Peterson strobe? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I use one of those now, and only because in a bright festival, like when it's the middle of the day, you can see it better. That's the only reason. But I think that like the intuitiveness and the speed of the old Boss pedal's the best. Yeah,
I love it. Love it. All right, final question. What is your favorite kind of pizza?
I want extra sauce, banana peppers.
Yes.
Pepperoni.
Ooh, that's a good choice. I like
that. That's how I like it. I like it extra spicy and extra saucy. So, some people aren't into sauce, but I think sauce makes a pizza. I think that's where your real flavor comes from.
There's a local pizzeria here that we love called Mi Familia, and my wife's go-to order is this like multiple meat pizza with some sun-dried tomatoes and some other stuff. But it comes with marinara sauce or pizza sauce, and she always adds their creamy garlic sauce to it. And sometimes once in a while they'll mess it up, and because we call in the order and they'll just write creamy garlic, and I have to be like, no, both. She wants both sauces, and it is a good combo. I'm here to tell you.
My wife Breezy, she doesn't like red sauce that much, so she usually gets just pesto, or she might get a creamy sauce. She doesn't. She's not into red sauce, so I'm always like, more for me. Put the extra. Put what you're going to put on hers on mine. I love it. I like it sloppy with red sauce. Yeah.
That just means you got to put extra Parmesan cheese on there.
That's right. Just
help absorb it.
Now I'm getting hungry.
That's my secret. I'm always hungry. All right, dude. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll slide over to Patreon and see what kind of shenanigans we can get into over there.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. All right, everybody. For Blake and for the Rev, good luck and good tones.
I told you that was wild. I wouldn't steer you wrong. No. And I'm not going to steer you wrong by telling you to go check out the Rev's new record, Honeysuckle. It's very, very good. You can get it wherever you get your music. Go to the link in the description of this video where you can find more information. And please don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really does help out here on YouTube a lot. I know everybody asks for it because it really does move the needle in a lot of ways. And again, if you like the audio version of podcasts the way I do, this is available wherever you get your audio podcasts, Apple, Spotify, etc. It's all there. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you to the Rev for taking the time, and if you want extra bonus conversation about lifting heavy weights, go over to Patreon, where the Rev and I get into all that, and for $5 a month, you help support the show, you get the ad-free feed, and you get extra bonus episodes beamed right to your ears every single week, and the link to that is down in the description as well, patreon.com/tonemob. All right, everybody, thank you so much. Talk to you on the internet very soon. Bye-bye.